Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I have my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio. We're going to start off with our foundational verse. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord. For he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Powerful verse. It's going to come in handy in today's conversation. Well, it's coming in handy in everyday conversation that we're having. And hopefully this verse is getting into your subconscious mind, because this is a verse that's going to carry you through into the future. Right, Dad?
Right. I mean, when we say that verse, when it says everything, is the Lord's, that includes our economics. That includes our money. And the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive. Every test of generosity eventually becomes a test of trust. Do we believe that God is the source, or that our help, our business, or the borrower is? Faith moves the transition from the nature to the from the natural to the supernatural. When faith governs your giving, you become a steward of heaven's supply. The psalmist declares the earth and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. So if the earth belongs to him, then so does everything in your hand. You can never run out, because you can never outgive the owner. Faith doesn't deny the reality of need. It simply refuses to bow to it. Faith says, my provision does not depend on payment. It depends on relationship. When you keep your eyes on the Father, you will never lack. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in Christ Jesus, Philippians 4:19. So, when you begin to realize and you start to break this down, Corey, it really boils down to, we can say the earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. But do we believe that? Well, guess what? There's tests that come our way every day that prove whether we believe it or not. And our discussion coming up on this next program will prove that in spades.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about this discussion. We're continuing our talk with Michael Wagner, who wrote this wonderful book, Leaving God Behind. We're doing a bit of a book club kind of an idea, where we're going chapter by chapter, actually 2 chapters at a time per program because of time. This is a fascinating conversation, because this information is important for Canadians to totally understand what's going on in our country. If you're confused, welcome to the club. Everyone's confused, but someone who can hopefully bring light to the conversation is this guy right here, Mr. Michael Wagner. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's always good to be with you guys.
Well, it's good to be with you, Michael. We're going through chapter 6, which is additional evidence on the Charter's war against Christianity. And we're also going to be talking about chapter 7, the Charter's transfer of power to the courts. Hopefully people have gotten your book and they're following along with us. But I'm going to go ahead and let you give us your summary, and then we're going to have some discussion. Go for it.
Okay, well, Chapter 6 has additional cases that explain how the Charter, or give examples of how the Charter extinguished or removed Christianity from Canada's public policy. The first case I discuss is a 1999 case where the town of Penetanquishing in Ontario was forbidden by the court from opening its meetings with the Lord's Prayer. Like it had historically for about 100 years, opened its town meetings with the Lord's Prayer, and someone challenged that. It went to court, and on the basis of the Charter, the town was no longer allowed to open its meetings with the Lord's Prayer, and so that would apply to all of Ontario's town councils. Following that, even more importantly, of course, was the definition of marriage. For all of Canada's history until 2003, Canada had a specifically Christian definition of marriage. It was based on a British court decision from 1866 called Hyde versus Hyde, and Canada in 1866 was still a British colony. So that court decision carried over into Canada and remained as our official definition of marriage until 2003, when it was struck down by the Ontario Court of Appeal. Let me just quickly read that definition of marriage. That was Canada's definition of marriage until 2003. It was a judge saying this: I conceive that marriage, as understood in Christendom, may for this purpose be defined as the voluntary union for life of one man and one woman to the exclusion of others. So that referenced Christendom as the basis for Canada's definition of marriage. In 2003, in the Halpern decision, the Ontario Court of Appeal ruled that that definition of marriage violated the Charter of Rights because it didn't give equality to same-sex marriage couples. Now, so in Ontario at that time, this definition of marriage changed to the voluntary union of any two people. And then the federal government, as a result of that court decision, decided to officially change the definition of marriage for all of Canada in 2005. So it was the Parliament that officially changed the definition of marriage in 2005, but it was because the courts had already struck down Canada's official definition of marriage. So again, we have the Charter changing Canada because of we had a specifically Christian definition of marriage, and that now violated the Charter. And then also toward the end of that chapter, I talk about the use of the word God in the preamble of the Charter. Because, the Charter does mention God, the supremacy of God and rule of law in the preamble. And many people believe that the Charter is Christian because it has the word God in the preamble. But unfortunately, the Charter later on in Section 27 says that the entire Charter must be interpreted in light of Canada's multicultural heritage rather than Canada's Christian heritage. So the word God in the preamble is considered to be a multicultural God and not the Christian God. So the Charter does not actually enhance Christianity's status in Canada, but in fact undermines Christianity's status in Canada's government and public policy. So that's kind of a summary of that chapter to make the main points there.
Well, let me ask you this about marriage. How would you respond then to those who argue that redefining marriage expanded freedom rather than, restricted it? Because I know that when we say freedom, that's a really loose term. And I talked to a friend, and when I was thinking about moving out of California, I was looking for a state that was free. And he challenged me. He said, well, what kind of freedom are you looking for? And I'm like, well, what kind of question is that? Freedom. And he goes, yeah, but is it freedom, or freedom that you only agree with, kind of a deal? There are people that will say, hey, we changed the law from man and woman for marriage to include everybody. That's more freedom, is it not? How would you respond to those people?
Well, it's very, very important to understand that our concepts of freedom reflect our worldviews. We've talked previously how that every political system is based on a particular worldview. And if it's not a Christian worldview, it'll be a non-Christian worldview, even an anti-Christian worldview. So how you understand freedom depends on your worldview. Like, freedom doesn't exist in a vacuum somewhere on its own without definition. And the concept of freedom that you have reflects your worldview. So I can understand why people would say, opening marriage to same-sex marriage couples is freedom because now they can do something they couldn't do before. But it reflects a different worldview, and you can call it the secular humanist worldview or the progressive worldview. So that gives them more freedom. But what happens is that with that worldview, you end up closing off some freedoms to Christians. For example, when it comes to Trinity Western University was trying to have a law school, but they weren't allowed to have the law school because they had a code of conduct for students that did not recognize same-sex marriage. And so they were denied the freedom to have a law school because they didn't reflect the same-sex marriage viewpoint of the progressive worldview. And even in Alberta, we had Christian schools. They're going to be shut down by the NDP government because they were not adopting LGBTQ plus policies. And those policies, became more formally entrenched in government policy as a result of same-sex marriage being recognized. Because when same-sex marriage is recognized, that means the government is officially approving of homosexual relationships. So if a school does not approve of those relationships, in the case of Alberta, they can be shut down. So what we have here is when you recognize the freedom to have same-sex marriage, you have a worldview that restricts freedom for Christians. And you might even remember more recently, Sean Foyt, he had some events that were shut down. And one of the reasons given for shutting them down is he didn't have the right views on LGBTQ issues. So when you open freedom for some by adopting a different worldview, you're actually closing freedom for others. And this actually relates to the concept of tolerance. Like people say, well, Christians are not tolerant of homosexuality, for example. Well, the secular humanist view or progressive view is not tolerant of Christian views on homosexuality. So every worldview tolerates some things and does not tolerate others. There's no kind of worldview that allows everything, because then you end up with contradictions in policy and so on. So for people who believe progressive ideology and secular humanism, allowing same-sex marriage gives more freedom in their worldview and restricts those who hold to a Christian worldview. When a Christian worldview is the underlying foundation, there are, restrictions in the sense that there is no same-sex marriage, because we're defining marriage in terms of what God gives as the definition of marriage. So there's always restrictions on freedom, and it depends on which worldview you hold to as to what you believe true freedom is and what should not be allowed.
Government has no right to be involved in marriage, period. End of story. I mean, God is the one that created marriage. He made them male and female, and, he said, this is now, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, they become one flesh. Even Jesus, when he was asked about marriage, went back to the very beginning of creation. And in Matthew 19 made that very clear. When I had marriages, I encouraged the couples, don't sign the register that you're, the marriage register of the government on the platform, making it a part of the marriage ceremony, because government has nothing to do with marriage. I mean, if two people of the same sex want to, quote unquote, be married, in my opinion, God says that's your choice. You have free choice, and you can choose the kind of life that you want to style. But you can't make me, accept that kind of lifestyle. I have free choice to choose what I have. So when we get the government involved in these things, that's when we got problems. It's the same thing with the education of your children. It's, the same thing of health. I mean, look at the extreme, and we've been able to exceed the extreme because of COVID. The extreme gets to the place where they just want you to be a robot. They want you to be involved in 15-minute cities. They're going to tell you what you can eat and what you can't eat. They're going to have digital currency, which means you can't buy any more of that. You've already had enough steaks for the month. No, you can't have any more gas. You've already traveled. That's where the enemy's headed. And the trouble is, we think we can play with the enemy a little bit and get away with it. You can't. What we have to do is get to the place where we understand, constituencies, if you want to call it that way. In other words, God allows man to have the freedom to make a choice. And so for even the government to come up and say, this is marriage, one man, one woman, it's like, well, that's a Christian marriage. That's right. But somebody can say, well, I'm not a Christian. I'll choose my own definition. Well, God says that's fine as well, because, choose you to this day who you will serve, either God or Baal. I mean, you have the choice. So I don't want to get off on that, but I think even when it comes to education of our children, we want to get to the place where it's the responsibility of the parent, period, not the school. Mm. And that's where it really gets off at.
Yeah. I had someone said to me, it was actually a coworker, and he's gay. And he said to me, this is years ago, right when this whole decision, of marriage, that it included, could be anybody. He said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, for me, I will never define marriage that way because I'm not gay. So when you say marriage to me, I immediately think of a man and a woman. It will never change. Why? Because I'm not attracted to men. So when I think of marriage, I think between a man and a woman. If you think of marriage and it's different, that's on you. But I don't think anybody should be pushing their definition of marriage. You know what I mean? Especially the government.
Yeah, just to put a little bit of a countervailing twist on that is that, like, when it comes to taxation, the government needs some kinds of criteria for, working with couples in terms of tax breaks and things like that. So there is a sense in which the government needs something there to, have a legitimate definition of what kinds of relationships would get tax breaks and wouldn't. So even if the government isn't, providing the exact definition of marriage per se in the way that we're talking about, it still needs some kinds of criteria for determining whether particular relationships deserve certain tax breaks and benefits, whether it's inheritance or whatever, if you know what I mean. I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. Let's get on to chapter 7. I know we can keep talking forever, but we're running out of time. The charter's transfer of power to the courts. Can you tell us a little bit about chapter 7?
Yes, when Pierre Trudeau originally proposed the charter in 1968, he wrote a book, with that proposal that was published by the government. And in there, he mentions in passing that his charter would mean that we would be turning away from Canada's traditional form of government, which is legislative supremacy. And he said it's okay to turn away from legislative supremacy. Now, what that meant, legislative supremacy means that it was elected politicians have the final say on our policies. And Trudeau wanted to move towards what we have now, judicial supremacy, give more power to the government, give more power to the judges, not the government, sorry. So he was proposing this transfer of power from elected politicians to unelected judges. So this was very, very controversial. So right from the time he proposed that, you have political scientists and law professors who are opposed to the charter proposal because they did not like that idea of transferring power from elected to not elected officials. So the period from Trudeau's proposal in 1968 until it was finally agreed upon in 1981 and then adopted in 1982. There's a period of many years there. And during that time, people were arguing against the charter, saying we don't want to transfer power to unelected judges. But unfortunately, that voice was not heard properly or not accepted properly because the idea of having entrenched rights was so popular among the people. It's very easy to tell people, don't you want your rights protected in the Constitution? Of course, we want our rights protected in the Constitution. So that's an easy sell that way. But the implications of it in terms of transferring power from politicians to judges that's a little bit more complex that people didn't seem to grasp and understand. So we did have this intentional transfer of power from elected officials to unelected judges as a result of the charter. And I think it's in that chapter toward the end where I'm quoting Justice Minister John Crosbie. Like, John Crosbie in 1985 was our justice minister under Brian Mulroney's government. Now, the charter was officially adopted in 1982, when the Queen came over and signed the Constitution, but there was a 3-year waiting period where governments were given an opportunity to update their laws to make sure that they would be in conformity with the charter, because they didn't want, if the charter came fully into effect in 1982, we already had laws that would be contradictory to the charter. So they were given 3 years to update everything before the charter came into effect to make sure that, they wouldn't have those kind of conflicts. And so when the charter was about to take its full effect in 1985, John Crosbie, our Minister of Justice, said, we have had a revolution in Canada. The adoption of the charter was a revolution. This is revolutionary change. And so he finally, this was before any of the decisions were actually released, from the Supreme Court on the basis of the charter. But he was explaining to Canadians what the adoption of the charter really meant. Now, if he had seen that and explained it to Canadians, when the charter was being discussed, I think that would have had a big impact on whether Canadians wanted to adopt it or not. But it wasn't until 1985 that he fully understood the implications of the charter as Justice Minister. He was Minister of Justice. He had his officials explaining to him what the implication of the charter was going to be. In 1985, they explained that. And nobody said anything like that previous to that time. So it's very important to understand that adopting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms fundamentally changed Canada's Constitution and fundamentally changed our legal system. We essentially went from being one kind of a country to a different kind of country. And so much of the book is explaining some of the major court cases that changed our country over the next few years as a result of the Charter.
So let me ask you this. Is the problem the charter itself or the way the courts are interpreting it back in 1982?
Both. Like, my argument, I rely more on the
both. Throw it all out. Let's just start over.
Like for sure, the charter is part of the problem. Like I focus on the charter. I think Trudeau, and I mean, he said he was trying to change the country. That's what Pierre Trudeau was trying to change Canada and make it into a different kind of country. That's what part of what the charter is all about. And so definitely the charter did that. But it is true also that the judges took the charter and ran with it. Like the power was transferred to the judges, and rather than kind of be humble about it, they just grabbed hold of it and just started making those changes as quick as they could. So I don't want to downplay the role that the judges had in this, but they couldn't have done it without the charter. So the charter is actually central to the whole problem.
Did the people of Canada really get a chance to vote on it?
Well, like not in the sense of a direct vote on the charter. Like what happened, we had a federal election in 1980. Like Trudeau had lost the 1979 election, and Joe Clark won a minority government. But because he had a minority government, it didn't last very long, and it fell. And in 1980, Pierre Trudeau, was reelected, and Trudeau was. This was also at the time of the first Quebec referendum, the independence referendum for Quebec, and Trudeau told the Quebecers if they would vote no and they would stay in Canada, he would change the Constitution. I think the implication was that he would make the Constitution, more favorable to Quebec. But then, ironically, Quebec was the only province that didn't sign on to his changes. But these things kind of tied together. Like we didn't have a direct vote on the constitutional changes, but we did have a vote. And in bringing Pierre Trudeau back into power, we were making the charter possible because he's the one who was pushing it. And so personally, I think the 1980 federal election was the most significant federal election of my lifetime, because if Trudeau had not been elected in 1980, we would not have had the charter. And there would have been other changes too. We wouldn't have had a national energy program that hurt Alberta. So I really think that 1980 federal election was transformative for Canada because Pierre Trudeau came back into power and was able to make the changes to the Constitution that he wanted to do.
How has this transfer of authority affected Canadians' ability to defend Christian principles through the democratic process? Because we interview tons of people. A lot of them are Christian. They're trying to fight, go through the courts, mostly because of their convictions, because of their Christian principles that they hold dear to their lives. Is it just on the whim, whatever judge you get? If the judge is favorable towards Christianity, you're going to get a good, judgment. If he is totally some other worldview, you're going to get that judgment. Is that kind of how it works now?
Well, to a certain degree, like I wouldn't say it's across the board that way, but I've actually talked to lawyers who say they do judge shopping when they're going to launch a case and they've got a big jurisdiction, let's say a province. They want to select a town in that province where they might get a judge that's more favorable. So there is some of that in the background, but I think a lot would depend on the particular issue that the Christians were pushing forward. I think there's some issues where Christians could push forward and they could get a favorable result under certain conditions, but then there are certain other policies that I don't think they'd get a positive result. Like let's say, for example, that some jurisdiction Christians are able to get a law against abortion. That would certainly be challenged under the charter. And although there are no direct charter decisions on the abortion issue, there's indirect ones which indicate to me that the judges are more favorable towards a pro-choice position on abortion. And also too, let's say there was a jurisdiction that was trying to change the definition of marriage back to the traditional definition of marriage. I think that would fail in a court challenge. So it would really depend on the issue as to whether or not the Christians could succeed with what they're trying to do in their political activity.
So Michael, what do we do? We got 60 seconds left. Well, are we stuck? We have what we have currently right now until something major changes, until another group of brainiacs get together to rewrite something, or Alberta separates and starts fresh with their own constitution. Where are we? How do we, what do we do with this? Do we just continue moving forward, doing the best we can? Do we focus on separation? What are your thoughts?
Well, my view would be focused on Alberta independence. But it's important for me to make this point, though, that because the charter is in place right now, Christian lawyers must use it when they're fighting court cases. So, I don't like the charter, and this book explains why I don't. But there are very important Christian lawyers who are fighting for Christian freedoms in the courts, and they must rely on the charter because that is our system. That's what we have right now. And so, I don't criticize lawyers for using the charter in their court cases because even though I don't like it, they do not have any choice but to use that. That's the mechanism that they have, and so they have to work with that. So we are, in a sense, stuck with it for now, but God can change things, and that's actually part of what we talk about in one of our future chapters. So.
All right. Yeah, we're going to have you back. We're going to be doing chapter 8 and chapter 9. We're going to give people a little bit of time to read it. So they're up on the conversation we're going to have. So chapter 8, chapter 9, the book's called Leaving God Behind. Michael Wagner, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for your dedication and research and piecing this all together. So it kind of gives us a more clarity of where we stand. I think it's been very unclear. It's unfortunate the schools don't educate people about the politics of Canada, our history, or anything like that, according to this, topic that we're talking about now. And I'm grateful that you took the time and you were led by the Lord to do it. So thank you, Michael. We'll have you back for chapter 8 and chapter 9.
Good. We'll see you then. Thanks.
Well, there you have it, Dad. How do you feel now? I love what you had to say. Government needs to keep their nose out of it. Keep your nose out of it.
I mean,
why is your nose in it?
Yeah, the government is a servant, but it's a servant of God. And Romans 13 is very clear of what that's all about. But the government, we've pulled government and we can't do anything with, in other words, whatever we do in life, it's always with the government. It's like, no. God is the one that rules and reigns in my life, in my family's life, and in whatever I do and say. And everybody should have that kind of freedom in this country, period. And the problem is when government thinks that they have to make some kind of an official decree, that's where we get into problems.
Well, here we go. We got Mark Carney saying, Muslim values are Canadian values. We've got then this argument for Sharia law. They want Sharia law. We want Christian foundation and Christian principles. It's now becoming like a religious war almost, for the freedoms that people want and what they want to live under. It's fascinating stuff, but you got to remember the earth and everything in it, the world and all its inhabitants belong to the Lord because he's the creator. He understands what we're going through. He has a solution. There is a solution. And God's on the throne. That will never change. We're quickly giving away a free booklet called Living in Truth. It's a devotional study on 1 Peter chapter 1 and 2. It's yours absolutely free. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on resources. We'll send one to you in the mail. You'll definitely want to get it, read it, do the reflection questions. You're going to get closer and deeper relationship with the Lord as you go through this study. You want to help support our mission, keep this conversation and truth on the air. We are viewer supported. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on donate. Many different ways to give digitally that way, or you can send it into the mail. You can send it to Talk Truth at 246 Stuart Creedon, Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H3C8. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.